Hello to all my dear followers. I'd like to welcome you to a new chapter of What if Naruto trains to become a Genjutsu master alongside Kurenai? At the top right of the screen, I've left a card with a playlist showing all the chapters of this fanfic in order. Please, I ask for your likes and comments so I can bring you more chapters. Without further ado, enjoy.
Naruto grumbled as he turned his alarm clock off. He blinked at the time and rolled back over, deciding since it was his day off, he could go back to sleep and take the day off from training. Besides, it was the first time he had actually slept well since the night before he killed those men. Kurenai's talk had done wonders, and he had slept without any bad nightmares last night. As a matter of fact, he began to think of a few dreams he had that caused him to smile sleepily while remembering them. It was when his thoughts kept him awake that he grudgingly started to awake fully and realized something. "Holy shit, I have a date with Ino today!" he shouted to himself as he jumped from his bed in shock. Naruto stood there for a few moments, his face going through shock and confusion for a bit before settling on resigned. He had a date, and even if he might not like the girl like that, he still was going to take her out since he had been the one to ask. With that in mind, he nodded his head and noticed something else odd about this morning. As he looked down, he noticed that something was poking at his boxers. He cocked his head in confusion and his hand reached down and grasped the pole within his boxers, giving a sharp gasp of surprise as he felt his members pulsing like the day before. "What the hell? I haven't seen Ino-chan or Kurenai today, so why the hell is this like this?" Naruto thought to himself. He glared down at his protruding member, wondering what the hell had brought about this reaction when he noticed it had grown slightly limp from when he had first touched it. He decided to go in the bathroom and simply allow this to go away like it had the other times. So, Naruto went into his bathroom and went through his daily ritual, noticing, even if he didn't want to, how sensitive his member was while hardened but how it slowly deflated over time. He was also shivering any time it touched or rubbed against something with some force, causing a pleasurable feeling within him. Naruto wondered about this but, again, decided it was best left alone and allowed it to go away by the time he was ready to spend the day relaxing and getting ready for his date. He decided he was going to clean his apartment and maybe go see his Gigi about what to do on a date if he had time. Scene break. Naruto sighed as he put away his cleaning materials. The cleaning of his house had taken the majority of the day. He had about 3 hours before he had to pick up Ino for his first date, and he could feel a few butterflies in his stomach about the idea. He figured he should go see his Gigi about this since he didn't want to ask Kurenai for help with this. It just felt wrong to do so. He was inclined to ask Shikamaru what he knew about it, but he knew Shikamaru would probably just tell him girls were troublesome and, while he had no doubt he could eventually get some information from Shikamaru, he knew it would be faster to go ask his Gigi. Besides, his Gigi had wanted him to be less of a stranger, and this would be a good time for him to repair a bit of their relationship. So, Naruto dressed in some of the civilian clothes he had purchased, a white shirt with a small Konoha symbol on the right breast with a large Uzumaki swirl on his back, both in orange. His shorts being a regular blue color along with his normal sandals. He smiled at his clean house, or at least as clean as his house could be, and proceeded out of the door, locking it behind himself as he left. He made his way out of the red light district, seeing many of the places getting ready for the nightfall when they did their best business. Naruto smiled and waved at a few of the women hanging around, they smiling back at the bright little man that had earned a special place among their hearts. Even the most corrupt businessmen around couldn't deny that having Naruto around changed you. They all allowed the little guy to hide in their shops when the odd mob might be formed. Though it didn't help much, it was a show of kindness they would never have given to anyone before Naruto. Naruto knew none of this, however, seeing the people here simply as kind folk who were much nicer than the general populace. He knew there was something wrong with their living conditions, but he hadn't known anything better his whole life, so he simply accepted it. So, he put these thoughts behind him as he moved onwards towards the Hokage's tower. The trip to the Hokage's tower was unusually short as Naruto was contemplating what exactly he should ask about, and what he knew about dates. As he found out rather fast, he knew next to nothing about an actual date. He had heard about people going on dates and people who liked other people asking them out on them, but he knew nothing of how they should go. He knew they entailed dressing up and going someplace to eat, usually. That was the extent of his knowledge upon the subject. Guess I will just have to ask Gigi about everything else. Naruto thought to himself as he looked up at the looming building of the Hokage Tower. blinking at how fast he had gotten here. Must have been very absorbed into my thoughts if I didn't even notice my whole walk here, Naruto thought as he entered the building and began climbing the stairs to the Hokage's office. Scene break. When Naruto reached the landing before the Hokage's office, he came across the Hokage's secretary. The woman had always been here since Naruto could remember, and she was never really cold to him, but never overly nice either. She was a neutral party that actually came as a reprieve to Naruto's world of glares. He smiled politely at the woman and asked, "Is Hokage Gigi in right now?" The woman looked up, a flash of emotion crossing her features before she said, "One moment please." And standing from her desk, approaching the Hokage's office door, she disappeared into the door after knocking and reappeared soon after, leaving Naruto little time to look at the surroundings he knew so well from his younger years. "The Hokage will see you now, Uzumaki-san," she said as she held the door open for him. Naruto stepped inside while nodding his head to the secretary. "Thank you," he said as he passed her, entering the Hokage's office with a slight smile on his face. Naruto turned to his Gigi as he heard the door close behind him. The Hokage smiled at him as he looked up from his piles of paperwork. "Well, this is a pleasant surprise, Naruto-kun," he said as he took a puff of smoke from his pipe. "I hadn't expected you to come see me so soon after our little talk," he said as his relief could be heard in his voice. Naruto tensed somewhat, but he still looked straight at his Gigi with some compassion. "Well, I figured I could ask you about something, Gigi. I don't really trust anyone else to ask," he admitted quietly. The Hokage's eyes grew less bright as he sobered up from his small bout of happiness. "What is it I can help you with, Naruto-kun?" he asked, his voice still cheerful with an underlying tone that showed he was taking this show of trust serious. Naruto shuffled his feet a bit, being a bit bashful about this before he spoke. "I sort of, he stuttered, unknowing how to broach such an embarrassing subject as his first date. I kind of asked Ino-chan out on a date yesterday and I need some help," Naruto said rushedly yet quietly. The Hokage blinked before a small smile spread across his face. "So, little Naruto-kun finally got himself a girlfriend?" he asked amusedly while looking at Naruto with a twinkle in his eye. "She's not my girlfriend," Naruto pouted as he looked at his Gigi, seeing the devious gleam that he was used to having in his own eyes present in those orbs of obsidian. He suddenly knew he was going to be teased about this. "Well, she is a girl," the Hokage stated, "and you have asked her out." He added, his smile widening as Naruto went to speak, "And she said yes," he finished as he smiled widely at the flustered face his adopted grandson had on his face. "I would say that means she is your girlfriend, or at least becoming one," his obsidian eyes twinkling as Naruto simply pouted at him. "She isn't. And I was only asking her to go eat with me as an apology for something I said. She turned it into a date," Naruto said in a heated voice while still pouting slightly. The Hokage chuckled good-naturedly. All right, Naruto-kun. What is it you need help with?" he asked, his humor still in his voice as Naruto pouted cutely. Despite his recent changes, Naruto still held that childlike quality to an extent, and it extended to his pout, leading to make it devastatingly effective if he used it against anyone. Not that he was aware of that. Naruto pouted a few more moments before shifting and asking, Everything?" he asked as he chuckled slightly, seeing the Sandame's look. "I mean, I know that I should dress up and that we should probably go eat at a restaurant, but I don't really know anything else," he said as he looked down, a bit ashamed at not knowing anything else. The Hokage simply nodded as if it was to be expected. "Well, Naruto-kun, there is little else to add on to for a first date," he said as Naruto looked up at him. "You remember the etiquette lessons I gave you?" he asked, to which Naruto nodded. "Then just act as courteous as you can and apply those lessons I gave you and you should be fine. Perhaps brush your teeth before you go and take a shower as well. Some women prefer flowers," the Hokage advised. "That's it?" Naruto asked a bit incredulously. The Hokage smirked. "For women, you will learn that almost everything you do is dependent on the particular woman you are currently involved with, Naruto-kun," he said as Naruto looked at him intently. "For one woman, it might be romantic if you attempt to hold her chair out for her to sit in, whereas with another, that woman will be offended and only annoyed with your attempt. It might not be this particular action either. Everything is subject to their interpretations to whatever you do," he said seriously, Simply attend to your etiquette lessons and I believe you will be fine. He smiled gently at Naruto. You might want to work on your patience though, the Hokage muttered. Naruto nodded, barely catching what his Gigi had muttered but catching it all the same, and smiled at his Gigi. Thanks Gigi, he said as he turned around to leave. And I am sorry for being so distant lately, he said quietly as he left the office, never seeing the look that flashed on the Hokage's face. Scene break. Naruto arrived back in his apartment, his mind reeling from what he learned. Girls are complicated. He decided after having thought over everything that the Hokage had told him about dates and women in general. He looked at the clock, noticing that his walk and the short talk he had plus the walk back had taken about an hour. He still had about 2 hours before he had to pick up Ino. He sighed as he took out his clothes that he was going to wear tonight. It was a black kimono that had orange swirls on it. Naruto had instantly fell in love with it when he had seen it in the shop and begged his Gigi to buy it for him even if he couldn't fit in it at the time. Sarutobi had laughed as he took Naruto inside and bought the kimono for him. Naruto had never had an occasion that he should wear it, but he felt it would be a good time to wear it. He pulled his Geta sandals out, wooden sandals which were a lot dressier than his blue shinobi sandals, and decided to take a shower before getting dressed and slowly making his way over to Ino's. Naruto stepped into his bathroom. He quickly stripped his boxers, the only piece of clothing he had kept on, having neatly folded his clean ninja attire after returning from the Hokage's and putting it up. He turned the water on, noticing that there still wasn't any hot water, but he didn't have time to go bathe at the waterfall. He stepped into the freezing cold shower, enjoying how it cooled his body off for a few minutes before noticing it was getting a bit too cold, and quickly lathered his hair with some shampoo and his body with soap before stepping back under the water and allowing it to drain away all of the grit he had accumulated during the past day. He turned the water off and grabbed his tattered red towel. Quickly drying himself, he stood in front of the mirror and made sure his hair looked presentable before brushing his teeth again and putting on some deodorant. He smiled into the mirror. Even if his first date wasn't with someone he liked that way, he was going to look his best. Naruto walked out of the bathroom, a towel around his waist as he walked into his bedroom and grabbed a pair of boxers, slipping them on before slowly placing his kimono on himself and checking it repeatedly. He smiled as he deemed himself presentable and looked at the clock. He frowned. He still had a good 45 minutes before he had to pick up Ino. Though putting on his kimono had taken a large amount of time, he still only needed approximately 15 minutes to make it to Ino's if he took the fast way, though he could probably take a leisurely walk and be there right on time. He was still a little confused at what the Hokage had meant about his patience though. He decided to take the leisurely walk and he would enjoy it as it was a nice day out today. With the stars beginning to appear, it was even more beautiful. Scene break. Naruto arrived at the Yamanaka household with 5 minutes to spare. He had decided to forego any flowers since he hadn't planned for them. Naruto looked up at the entrance into the Yamanaka clan compound. He shrugged and knocked on the front gate. He waited for a minute or so before a man came out, platinum blonde hair that was spiky at the top of his head while falling to the mid-back behind himself in a ponytail much like Ino's. His eyes were a curious blue-green shade with no pupils and a strong jawline. He was wearing a plain black shirt with the Yamanaka clan emblem on his back along with some gray pants. The thing that had Naruto's eyes latched onto it was the tanto strapped to his waist. The man looked down at Naruto from his impressive height and said, "Come in." Naruto nodded nervously as he went further into the compound. He could feel his ninja side screaming to come out, hoping to stop this show of emotions, as he showcased his nervousness. The man closed the door and stepped in front of Naruto as he began to lead the young man to a house within the compound and into the living room of that house. The compound grounds were filled with flowers of all kinds and houses much like the one Naruto was currently in. He looked up at the man as he sat down on the couch. The man simply looked at Naruto unervingly. Their eyes locking, Naruto's nervous sapphire orbs slowly allowing the ice to creep over his stare, as the man seemed to pierce into his mind with just his gaze. The stare down stretched and stretched on and on as the two shinobi's eyes fought a battle of wills. Naruto didn't know who this person was, but he was not going to let this man try to intimidate him. Naruto's will hardened and his eyes seemed to turn into frigid wastelands as he stared back at the man with a look that would freeze most people from the intensity of it. The man suddenly cracked a grin, the stare down obviously over as the man's eyes lost that sharp look that it had held since he sat down. "My name is Yamanaka Inoichi," I am Ino's father, he said as he looked at Naruto. Naruto bowed his head slightly. It is a pleasure to meet you, Yamanaka-san. Your previous teammates speak highly of you, he said as he knew a little about the man from Shikamaru and Chuji's parents, though he didn't know this was that man right away. As they do you, Inoichi retorted. I must say, I am displeased to have you going out with my daughter Uzumaki-san, he said bluntly, causing Naruto's eyes to narrow. As much as I respect you, I do not trust you, he said honestly, drawing a slightly surprised look from Naruto. Perhaps it is best to say, I do not trust what you contain, nor the general populace. Naruto flinched back slightly, knowing what the man was about to say. Though I know that your seal will keep the beast at bay, I know not what the Konoha people might do to anyone who is with you, and my daughter has no reason to be subjected to such hate simply because of her association with you, he said with naught but truth in his words. Naruto could feel his willpower breaking. Harming his friends was something he endeavored to avoid himself. How could he forget that what he was doing would endanger Ino to a life of glares and isolation as well? But I cannot keep her from you, nor you from her. I only ask that if you do not see this as anything more than a simply friendly nightly outing, you not ask Ino out alone like this again, Inoichi said. Naruto acknowledged the man's words, but he also knew that the man was being entirely unfair to both himself and Ino. As much as he despised Ionakai's words, they also angered him. I do not suppose you would ever agree to me being anything more than casual acquaintances with Ino, Naruto said, his voice low. Inoichi nodded. Why even allow her out tonight then? Even if you cannot forbid us from seeing each other, I am sure you could arrange to have someone be near us during this night, Naruto said. Inoichi shook his head. I could, but then Ino would only be pushed towards you, something I don't want, he admitted. It is nothing against you, Uzumaki-san. It is just the fox ruining my life for me yet again by bigots that can see nothing between a kunai and a scroll, Naruto said spitefully. Inoichi cringed but didn't back down. Naruto felt his heart plummet, it realizing something before his head did as he stood. I am going to wait outside. Please inform Ino-chan to meet me outside. Do not worry, Yamanaka-san. Ino-chan will be home no later than an hour and a half from when we leave, he said as he turned and walked out, not looking at Inoichi again. Scene break. Naruto's eyes flashed red as he walked outside, his first date jitters completely gone from the rage he felt. Damn it! He cursed as he cocked his head to look up at the sky. He enjoyed the twilight pink that painted the sky, the few stars that peeked through the canopy of lingering sunlight. He closed his eyes, taking deep breaths as frustration set in past the anger. He sighed as he heard the door to the house open. He turned and braced himself as he set a smile on his face. Good evening, Ino-chan, how are you? He asked as looked at what she had chosen to wear. She had a purple dress that hugged her body nicely, showing off all of her curves while accentuating her long ponytail behind her. The dress itself tied up by her neck as it fell down her body and ended around mid-calf. Purple high heels were her choice of shoes, a diamond-studded scrunchie in her ponytail instead of her usual one, some diamond earrings that shone in the twilight light, and a silver necklace hung around her neck. It was obvious that she had picked things that highlighted her body and strong points, but Naruto couldn't enjoy the show from the rage he felt, though he did blush from how she smirked at him. Good evening, Naruto, she responded and stepped forward, holding her arm out for him to take. Shall we go? She asked while she fluttered her eyes. Naruto stepped forward, grabbing her hand and smiling at her as he led the way from the compound. Scene break. The walk was nice and quiet, the two enjoying a slightly uncomfortable silence. Naruto attempting to control the slight anger he felt while Ino was a bit flustered from how good Naruto looked. They were about halfway to Ichiraku's when Ino finally spoke. So, Naruto, how is your team doing? She asked. Naruto spared a look in her direction before looking straight again, Ino wondering why his eyes flashed when he did so. They are fine. Sakura is learning medical ninjutsu from Kakashi-sensei, while Sasuke learns some chakra detection, he answered. Ino nodded. And yourself? She asked. Naruto turned and regarded her for a few moments, ignoring the mutterings around them that Ino seemed capable of doing, and finally responded. I am training my chakra sensor ability. It seems I have an aptitude for it, along with needing some chakra control. He said. Ino whistled. You're a chakra sensor? She asked. Naruto nodded. That's impressive. I haven't met anyone other than my dad who can do that, she admitted. Naruto's eyebrow raised at that, but he didn't question anything. They fell into a bit of a more comfortable silence as they continued walking. Naruto's anger having been mollified a little at Ino actually asking about his own achievements. How about your team? Naruto asked suddenly. Even if he already knew about it from Shikamaru, it was nice to get her talking as they walked. Well, Asuma-sensei started to teach us heavily after Shikamaru asked for more training. Apparently, he didn't like that you were training and we were just sitting around, Ino said as she rolled her eyes. Naruto cracked a smirk. Shikamaru has gotten a lot more stamina and so have I. Chuji just seems to get a bit stronger each time we spar though, she said. Any cool missions? Naruto asked as Ichiraku's came into sight. Our C rank was just some extraction mission from some bandit camp. The letter was small but very easy to get. Shikamaru just knocked some guys out with some of his shadows before I used a clan jutsu to create some diversion for Shikamaru to grab the letter and then retreat with Chuji as rear guard, she explained. Naruto nodded and stepped in front of Ichiraku's. Ino looked up, a slight frown coming to her face. Ichiraku's Naruto? She asked as if she couldn't believe it. Naruto sighed. He shook his head. Yes, Ino-chan. Ichiraku's, he said as he pushed her inside and sat on his stool with Ino sitting next to him. Oi! Tuchi-san, Ayam-chan. He called out to the back, causing Tuchi and Ayam to appear and smile at Naruto. Well, if it isn't little Naruto. Tuchi boomed as Ayam hugged Naruto over the counter. Tuchi's eyes sparkled as he looked over at Ino. And he has himself a girlfriend too, he laughed lightly. Ino glared slightly at the man, but her cheeks were dusted a light pink. She is not my girlfriend, but I am paying for her. 3 miso ramen for me and whatever Ino-chan wants, Naruto said. His voice lacked the usual warmth it had during his visits to his favorite place in Konoha. Tuchi and Ayam blinked while even Ino could feel Naruto's loss of cheer from his favorite place. Ino quietly placed her order and an uncomfortable silence reigned as Naruto looked forward. His eyes glazed over as he thought of something for a good minute. Tuchi and Ayam slowly walked away from the counter to work on their order. The silence was insufferable and even Ayam, who was usually very cheerful when Naruto was around, was subdued. How is your clan training coming along, Ino-chan? Naruto asked. Ino almost jumped from her seat, but answered his question. It is going good. I need some more chakra control for Daddy to teach me the next level, but Asuma-sensei said he was going to be starting us on the next level of training soon, she said. Naruto nodded as their orders were placed in front of them. Ayam casting a worried look over at Naruto as the 2 teenagers broke their chopsticks and began eating at a sedate pace. No words were spoken and only the cooks felt uncomfortable as the 2 ate their dinner together. Naruto kept an eye on Ino, making sure she was comfortable and relaxed in her seat as they ate. The 2 finished their meal, Naruto deciding he wasn't too hungry tonight and paid for the meal before standing with Ino. Nice seeing you again, Tuchi-san, Ayam-chan. Please take care, he said as he and Ino bowed to the 2 proprietors of the little ramen stand and left. Tuchi and Ayam shared a grief-ridden look before beginning to close up their shop. Scene break. As the 2 walked back towards Ino's house, Ino became restless. She was a talkative person by nature, and she had been subdued by Naruto's attitude and the slightly awkward air between the 2 as they had headed to their location. Now she was comfortable around Naruto, even with his improved look, and wanted some more gossip. She was always one to know more than she should. She was known as a gossip queen even in the academy days, and she couldn't pass up the idea of getting more information on the Konoha heartthrob from the best source, his teammate. She figured Naruto would be only too willing to share some of his team's success or training since he hadn't done so yet, and he was always a boastful character. Even though she had only seen him changed recently, she hadn't interacted with him much since his change, and yesterday he hadn't seemed too changed from his academy days, despite what Shikamaru had told her of him. So, she set into her interrogation. So, Naruto, Ino started, causing Naruto to look at her with some curiousness. He couldn't deny that even with the horrible start that had occurred with this date, He was enjoying this little outing with Ino. Even though they hadn't done anything beyond eating, he was enjoying just relaxing with someone his own age, beyond Shikamaru. "What has your team done in terms of missions?" she asked slowly. Naruto merely shook his head. A small smile spread across his face. "Nothing important until our C rank," he said. Ino kept the small frown off her face when it was apparent that he wasn't going to elaborate. "What happened?" she asked innocently. Naruto looked at her for a few moments. "Well, our mission was to escort this bridge builder to Nami no Kuni." He started explaining how they had gotten the mission from Sasuke's demands. Naruto didn't really like the gleam in Ino's eyes when he mentioned that and wanted to stop talking, but they had some more time before they reached her house again. He was fairly sure this was not something he wanted to keep telling her, but he continued since he could think of nothing else to steer the subject to. Eventually, he came to the fight with the demon brothers and Sasuke's professional attitude while dealing with them. He noticed they were on the street leading to her house and was about to explain why he had frozen when Ino's smile stopped him. "I see," she said as if it explained it all. Naruto cocked his head to the side as they approached her clan compound, a bad feeling settling in his stomach. "So, Sasuke-kun beat 2 Chunin opponents with a little bit of help, huh?" she said as she sighed dreamily. "He really is something else," she said as they arrived at her door. Naruto just looked at Ino as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was on a date with him and she was dreaming about Sasuke? His anger and frustration reappeared faster than he could stop and he ground out, "Yeah, if by something else you mean a boy who ignores the people who love him in favor of stewing in his own past, incapable of moving on." Ino turned to Naruto, fury in her eyes. "What the hell do you know?" she said heatedly. "Sasuke-kun lost his entire family in one night. Of course he couldn't move past that until the murderer is brought to justice. I remember when my mother died," she said, her voice losing some of its fervor and her whole mood speaking of the sadness she felt. "I was so lost, so afraid." Her eyes gained a slightly lost look. Naruto could remember his own eyes looking like that in any picture before Kurenai. "If it wouldn't have been for Daddy, I don't think I would have made it," she said as she turned back to Naruto, her eyes regaining their flame. "Don't you dare accuse him of stewing in the past when he has no closure and no way to alleviate his pain," she said heatedly. Naruto's eyes turned icy. He knew about Sasuke's pain. He knew it almost as acutely as Sasuke himself. Though he had never lost, Naruto never had. Naruto was bereft of those good memories from the start, and he swore that was more painful than losing them, if only slightly. He has the love and support of every single person within this village. He is a weak person who thinks that he must bear his burden alone without the support of those that care for him. He knows nothing of true pain. I may respect him for his limited power, but I despise him for the love he blatantly throws away." Naruto said, his icy blue eyes staring into Ino's own. Ino scoffed. "What the hell gives you the right to look down on him, huh?" she shouted. "You know nothing of his pain. Don't you dare try to compare him to you," she yelled at Naruto before turning and walking into her clan compound. "I don't ever want to see your face again, Naruto," she yelled from inside her compound. Naruto simply turned away, his eyes watering. Scene break. Naruto walked away from the Yamanaka compound, his heart and mind in shreds as his eyesight grew blurry. His body went on autopilot as he began to jump from one roof to another as he traversed his home village. Despite the fact he didn't like Ino past anything other than a friend, it still hurt to be told by one of the few he did count as distant friends that she never wanted to see him again. As he hopped to a destination unknown to his conscious mind, his thoughts reeled from the whole night. He had known Ino held a fascination akin to Sakura's about Sasuke, but Sakura had toned down her adoration, if only slightly, and he had hoped Ino would have done so more than Sakura since she hadn't even seen the guy since team formations. Instead, she seemed to only have increased her amazement of him in general, though it didn't help that Naruto had said that Sasuke basically took down the demon brothers by himself until Kakashi appeared. He scowled as he looked down at the village from his spot on the side of the Hokage monument. His feet latched onto the faces via chakra as he climbed to his spot of solace within the village. Anger engulfed him as he looked up the side of the Hokage monument, looking to the stars and beginning to take calming breaths as he continued climbing to his own little paradise within a village that hated him. She doesn't know what she is saying. She doesn't know what my life is like. There is no reason to be angry at her, Naruto thought to himself. True, Ino may have been wrong in her words, but none of Naruto's classmates understood or even had an inkling of his childhood beyond Sasuke or Shikamaru. Sasuke only because the two did have an awkward bond forged from the shared traits of two lonely boys that sought a bond that none but the two seemed to fill. Shikamaru because Naruto had explained what he needed to about his past for Shikamaru to find out himself. Ignorance is bliss, as they say, Naruto thought as he let his anger leave him and he arrived on top of the Yandame's head. Naruto looked up at the stars even as his feet leveled out. His head craned back to see the full moon accompanied with the millions of stars that could be seen while so far away from the village's lights. Frustration set in. How am I supposed to show these people I am not Kyuubi? Naruto thought, his eyes now flowing with tears of frustration. They don't even give me the chance to prove it. They just condemn me for nothing beyond the fact I hold something that no one understands or comprehends. Thoughts floated in and out of Naruto's head. The glares, the talks, the quiet whispers that followed him everywhere. He went like a stigmata that screamed to those around him, or those he might try to get to know, to stay away from him, to leave him alone. With that thought, Naruto's body seemed to just crumple in on itself, his legs losing the power to hold him as his back and head landed on the hard stone. His chest heaving as tears streamed down the sides of his face and into his hair from his position on his back. Is that my fate? He questioned. Naruto was never one to put much stock into destinies or fates, but this night he couldn't stop the depressing thoughts. To forever be alone? He thought with despair as the world seemed to crumble and disappear, leaving only the hate and maliciousness he could still feel from the village. Is that the fate of every Jinchuriki? He despaired. Naruto wanted to be Hokage, but the other side of his dream, the one that none knew about or saw within him, was that Naruto envisioned a woman by his side, her smile holding warmth and love from deep within her heart as he wore the Kage robes, his children playing at their feet as he smiled down at them, being there for them as none had been there for him. Their smiles and happiness keeping him complete in his dreams to when his hair would grow gray and he would look like his Gigi. Their safety and health his own responsibility. Naruto dreamed of these things, even if he didn't fully understand what it would entail. Such are the dreams of the young. Naruto cursed the Kyuubi, he cursed the village, he cursed his Gigi, and he cursed the Yandame for choosing him to carry this burden. Naruto never wanted this. He was a newborn, barely capable of making noise, and he was set with the greatest burden one could place upon another, being the sacrifice whom protects others while being ostracized by those same people he protects. But as Naruto let his frustration and anger run its course, even his despairing thoughts occupying his mind, Naruto came to another conclusion in the dark recesses of his mind, that whispering voice egging him on even if he could only seemingly get a feel for the direction that voice wanted him to go subconsciously. So, Naruto passed into unconsciousness as he felt the last of his tears drain from him and his mind shut down from the emotional strain he had been put under. Scene break. Naruto grumbled as he blearily opened his eyes, looking at the sun with a glare. "Stupid sun, waking me up," he said quietly as he rolled over and began to remember the previous night and the reason he was up here. Naruto let his emotions pass through him and felt as they seemingly melted away from him, leaving only a quiet resignation as he sighed into the stone on which he was laying. Guess it was too much to ask for, he whispered to himself as he stood and looked at his clothes. He was glad he had come here and not his training clearing, since the kimono would probably be ruined had he done that. When training crossed his mind, Naruto's head shot to the sky and he shook his head as he began to head down the mountain. Scene break. Naruto sighed as he walked onto Training Ground 7, dressed in his shinobi gear after a quick stop at his house, and spread his bloodline out, sensing to see if anyone was following him. With a small nod, he disappeared into the brush and headed to his training clearing to work on a few things, mainly to keep his mind from brooding over what happened last night. Though he had made some peace with certain knowledge, he still didn't want to think about such depressing things. He walked into his clearing and smiled slightly, happy to be doing something he could really let loose in. He stretched himself out, noticing how kinked his muscles had become because of his sleeping state and taking a whole day off from training. Then he summoned 15 clones and set himself in a loose stance. His body completely relaxed as his clones broke into groups of 5 each, and the first group looked at each other, silently telling each other what they wanted to do as Naruto himself closed his eyes, using his bloodline to feel his own clone's chakra. Naruto waited only a few more moments before the 5 clones shot off and began to attack him. His clones were faster than him since they did not have weights upon them. As such, they were closer to his real speed than Naruto and provided the best training besides Kurenai and her own clones. He reveled in the moment as he ducked under the first punch and allowed his instincts, reflexes, and bloodline to work in unison to keep him unharmed. A small smile crept across his face as he spun away from the initial clone and into the path of one of the other clones, who jumped to avoid the killing blow he sent his way, as another clone appeared near him, giving him no time to rest as it sent a vicious kick towards his lowered head. He took a kunai out of his pouch and held it in a guard position to stop the kick to his head. His clone hopped back to keep from getting dispelled as another clone appeared, sending a kunai attack at his creator. Naruto blocked it and lashed out with a quick kick, dispelling that clone. Naruto smirked, his smile growing as he saw the smoke dissipate, and launched himself at the rest of his clones with his kunai and Genjutsu alone. The all-out brawl lasting close to 3 hours before Naruto finally dispelled his last clone and fell onto his back, his chest heaving from his fight. A soft chuckle escaped his lips before he could stop it. That soft chuckle turned into a wide smile as he began to laugh softly. The soft laughter quickly raising in volume until it was almost a barking laugh, Naruto wondering what was so funny as his mouth continued to laugh and smile until his sides began to ache. The laughter was anything but joyous. It was a laugh that held Naruto's frustration at his situation, which gave only an odd feeling to anyone else listening to it. Naruto continued laughing even as he felt a presence appear on his bloodline before the person appeared in his vision, his sides aching as he continued laughing. "I would take it that laughter means your date went well?" Kurenai asked with a smile. Naruto could do nothing but roll onto his side as his laughter increased only slightly. Kurenai stood next to him, her smile remaining on her face as she looked down at Naruto, waiting for his laughter to end. In his mind's eye, Naruto saw himself start to bash back at a mental barrier that allowed him control over his own actions. Slowly, he began to work his way around the barrier, even as his laughter continued. Almost a minute later, Kurenai's eyebrow twitched as she looked down at Naruto. "Care to tell me what is so funny, Naruto?" she said, her irritation and a hint of concern showing in her voice. Naruto finally managed to bash against his mind and started to gain some control as he forced this odd laughter down from his body. It took another minute for him to stop the chuckles from his body, and by this time, Kurenai was looking at him worriedly, though she was still annoyed. "Well?" she asked. Naruto smiled softly, definitely annoyed. It felt good to have someone care about you, even if only to be annoyed by you. "Nothing is funny, Kurenai-sensei," he said as he rolled off his side and sat with his legs crossed, his back to her. She frowned even without him seeing. He could tell she was. "I just had a brief need to laugh," Naruto said as he turned and flashed a smile in her direction, closing his eyes so he didn't have to look at her and so she couldn't see his own just yet. "Brief," Kurenai said, her annoyance back full force. "That was anything but brief, Naruto," she said as she crossed her arms over her chest. Naruto's eyes still wouldn't open. "Open your eyes, Naruto," she said. Naruto turned from her, not wanting to face her for some reason, and opened his eyes as he looked to the side. Kurenai's frown increased. "What's wrong, Naruto?" she asked, her sensei voice in full blast from her annoyance. Naruto flinched but still wouldn't look at her. "Just something I realized, Kurenai-sensei," Naruto said, a bit of a monotone to his voice. Kurenai looked at him scrupulously. Naruto could feel her eyes roving his body, causing him to shiver for 2 different reasons. The first was because he didn't want her to know what he had to say just yet, and the other for a reason known yet unknown to himself. "Naruto," she said, her voice quieter and much softer as she spoke, much like when she had asked him to come back from the wave mission alive. A lump formed in his throat as he could feel his resolve slipping, but he needed to get his head on straight first. "Not now, Kurenai. I can't tell you yet," Naruto said as he finally faced her, his blue eyes seemingly flashing a picture of a broken sapphire before they hid it behind dull, yet gleaming blue eyes. "Please. I will tell you soon. Just..." He turned away from her as he saw her eyes soften. "Not yet," he said softly. Although he couldn't see it, Kurenai nodded and her eyes hardened slightly before her hand clenched, and she responded verbally. "All right, Naruto. Just don't." She trailed off before speaking again. "Don't wait too long, okay?" she asked with a weak smile. Naruto nodded his head and stood. Can we train, sensei? It helps me, he said. Kurenai frowned slightly. He never called her just sensei, always Kurenai sensei or just Kurenai. Of course. Let's begin, she responded as she moved in front of him, and the two began to practice their Genjutsu for the majority of the day. Scene break. That's it for today, Kurenai said as she looked up at the sky. She had stopped using her chakra, but Naruto had kept going until she told him to stop. Naruto nodded, and Kurenai seemed to drop her hold on her emotions as he witnessed the hurt she was in from his attitude. It was obvious he was hurting or something was majorly bothering him, and he couldn't share it yet. She was worried for him. Naruto looked at Kurenai, and the two took a breath before they both began walking towards Training Ground 7. He knew she was worried, and this whole day of training had allowed him to calm down and make sense of his realizations last night, past the anger and frustration he had experienced. He sighed softly as he glanced sidelong at his sensei. It was a bit awkward as she kept casting worried glances at him when she thought he couldn't see her. A very small smile made its way onto his face. Maybe his realization wasn't going to be too bad. But then he crushed that thought underfoot. The two reached the training grounds, and Kurenai cast one last worried glance at him before speaking. Well, I guess I will see you tomorrow, Naruto, she said, a note of sadness in her voice as she couldn't get him to tell her what was bothering him. She began hand seals when Naruto's voice broke through her concentration. May I walk you home tonight, Kurenai? He asked, his normal voice almost back if a bit more monotone than she was used to. She looked down at him, a bit surprised but nodded nonetheless as she stopped her hand seals. Naruto smiled at her, not forced like before, as he stepped up next to her again, and the two began the trek to her apartment complex. As with the walk through the woods, both parties cast glances at each other, one for worry and the other as he observed his companion. The silence that reigned over the two was broken only by the soft footfalls the two set upon the stone beneath them. Though this silence was awkward because Kurenai was wondering why Naruto wanted to walk her home tonight. They had agreed to keep themselves away from suspicion, and this would be the perfect example of her teaching him. But Kurenai's worries were for naught as her apartment complex came into sight and no one had been on the roads they had taken. It was a bit odd. Naruto stopped at her apartment complex's outer wall and looked at Kurenai. Thank you for letting me walk you home, he said, though his eyes darted to the complex. Kurenai smiled softly, an idea forming in her head, a reason for which Naruto would ask to walk her home, so she decided to test it. Would you like to come in for some tea? She offered, since it was a bit early for dinner. She was awarded with a nod from Naruto, who had secretly hoped she would invite him in like she had a few times before they had left the training clearing, when they had initially started training. Naruto and Kurenai walked up to her apartment, on the 5th floor, and she quickly let Naruto in and closed the door behind him as they removed their shoes. She walked Naruto into her living room, which held a sofa and love seat, and a coffee table. Naruto sat down on the proffered sofa seat and waited patiently as Kurenai made some tea and quickly appeared from her kitchen with a smile on her face. She sat down on the opposite end of the sofa and set the tea on the coffee table as she faced him. Naruto took a sip of the tea as Kurenai did so and smiled at her. It's delicious, he complimented. She merely smiled at him as she seemed content with waiting for him to get to the real reason they were here. Naruto and Kurenai sipped at their tea for a few more minutes before Naruto set his tea down and sighed, his face turning away from Kurenai as his eyes glazed over slightly. You asked earlier how my date went? He asked, his voice going monotone slightly again. Yes, Kurenai said cautiously, her eyes locked on his face. Naruto frowned and shook his head. In a word, he said, terrible. Must have been the worst first date in the history of first dates, he said as he smiled at his own little joke. Kurenai wasn't so pessimistic. It couldn't have been that bad, she responded. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Really? He said with incredulity. I thought the date might have been nice even if I wasn't sure what to do, nor that I liked Ino like that, but I wanted to give it a shot, he said as Kurenai nodded. I got some advice that was pretty sound. My clothes were new and I had showered very religiously before it, he said as he glanced at Kurenai, who was smiling gently at him, letting him know that was correct way to go about a date. But it was for naught. His eyes darkened. Before I even saw Ino, Inoichi-san met me at the gate and took me into the compound without a word. That was understandable, and I figured he would be a bit protective being a parent. I know I would be," he said as Kurenai nodded in agreement with the thought. He stared at me for a few moments when he sat me down in his living room before basically telling me to stay away from his daughter because he couldn't force us to stay apart. He was being brutally honest with me by telling me he respected me, but didn't trust me. He said, Kurenai's eyes hardening as Naruto clenched his fist. More specifically, the fox within me and the consequences of my burden. He spat out, "But I worked past that and determined to try and make a good effort with Ino," he said, gaining an approving look from Kurenai. The date itself was fine, nothing special. Just a nice walk through the village. Just talking as if old friends about anything that might cross our minds. Before eating at Ichiraku's since I hadn't been in a while and Ino hadn't suggested any place. And we left there. He elaborated. It was on our walk home that Ino began asking me about my team, he continued, causing Kurenai to look curious about that particular statement. More specifically, Sasuke. Kurenai's eyes seemed to shine with understanding, knowing about Naruto's feelings for his teammates. I told her about our C rank, up to the Demon Brothers' attack, he said. Kurenai shook her head as she knew the details of the mission through Naruto's own recap. That was when we reached her house, and she said something that… He paused as if pondering what to say. I guess you could say annoyed me, he said, his eyes seemingly growing steely in the light. She began fantasizing about Sasuke as she was on a date with me. His hands clenched and Kurenai's face showed her shock. That was beyond rude. Then she said that he was really something else. He said with a slight scowl, causing Kurenai to flinch slightly. A fight ensued in which I called Sasuke weak because he relies only on himself and is incapable of looking past his own past to dream for a better future. Ino responded by telling me that I knew nothing of his pain and that I couldn't hope to judge him. He said as Kurenai's look turned to one of slight pity, knowing some of his childhood. Needless to say, that triggered my anger and I shouted a bit more at her before she stomped away and told me she never wanted to see me again, he said as he looked down. Kurenai moved slowly, shifting herself on the sofa and sitting closer to him as she took his hand in hers and gave it a reassuring squeeze. He looked at her. His tears had dried up, so he simply allowed the hurt to be shown to her as he sat there. I'm sorry, Naruto, she said quietly. I know that your life hasn't been anything normal since you were born, but don't despair, she said gently. Ino was wrong in what she said, but she doesn't know any better. You can't blame her, she said. Why not? He asked suddenly, his eyes burning. The villagers blame me for the Kyuubi without knowing the truth. Why can't I blame someone like them? He said, his anger burning bright. Kurenai simply shook her head, her voice gaining a steely tone behind it. This and that are different and you know it, she said as Naruto stared at her. Besides, do you wish to do to another what the villagers do to you? She asked. Naruto's fire dimmed, but he shook his head as Kurenai squeezed his hand again. I didn't think so either. You are so much better than those you protect, she said. Naruto's eyes shone with his gratitude as he opened his mouth again, continuing his narration. I stormed away from her house. I was pissed and frustrated, so I went to a special spot before simply allowing my emotions to roll over me, he said as he turned from her again, those depressing thoughts returning. I was angry at the villagers, Ino, Kyuubi, the yondaime, a whole bunch of people. I didn't want this. Why should I have to suffer? He said as Kurenai looked at the young man in front of her with some pity. He carried such a large burden for anyone to carry. It was unfair, for it condemned those who did to a harsh existence. But, after my anger, my frustration led to my questions. He whispered, how was I to prove myself if people like Inoichi won't even give me the chance? He said as Kurenai simply sat there being witness to Naruto's internal struggle. How was I to prove my worth as Naruto, and not simply as the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi? He said quietly. That led to the other question I hadn't wanted to think about. He admitted, you know I don't really think anything is predetermined, Kurenai, but last night shook me so much I was questioning, what is my fate? His voice barely above a whisper. Am I destined to be alone for the rest of me life? He said quietly. Is that the fate of every Jinchuriki? I questioned as I looked at the moon. He admitted as he grew quiet and gazed at the wall of Kurenai's apartment with a blank gaze. Kurenai squeezed his hand as she smiled at him. I don't know anything about fate or destiny, Naruto. She started as he continued looking at the ground. But you are not alone, Shikamaru, and Chuji really respect you and call you a close friend. She said. Naruto nodded. And me, she admitted as Naruto raised his head to look at her. I am your friend, just like Takashi-san, remember? She smiled at him. Naruto smiled at her too and squeezed her hand back. Thank you, he said, his eyes returning to their gleaming sapphire likeness. Her smile widened as she determined that she had helped him twice in 2 days with 2 very important issues regarding his own feelings in life. No problem, Naruto, and besides, you shouldn't think like that. I am sure there is a woman out there for you, she said happily. His eyes darted to her, but she didn't catch it as he nodded at her, a smile spreading across his face. I can only hope, Kurenai, he said as he poured all of his gratitude into his smile and the squeeze he gave her hand before gently removing his hand from hers and grasping his teacup again. He sipped his teacup as Kurenai grasped her own, the two sitting on the sofa, next to each other in comfortable silence. Naruto could feel his flagging faith in his dream of a family being bolstered by Kurenai's faith within him. Kurenai simply sitting there and enjoying the time she had with her student and knowingly showing her support for Naruto. Although Naruto and Kurenai's relationship was odd, being that Kurenai would act as a sensei 1 minute and his friend the next, and Naruto would be a student who didn't wish to discuss things with his sensei until he was ready to telling his friend his problems in the hope that his friend would be just that, a friend, and help him as best they could. Their relationship might be odd to any who looked at it from the outside, but, to them, their relationship was one of the best they had ever had with another person. They sat there sipping their tea for a few more moments before Naruto set his teacup back down and stood, Kurenai following his example as he turned to her and smiled up at her. Thank you for listening, Kurenai. He looked down. This may be a bit bold, but he trailed off as he stepped forward and hugged her tightly. I don't know what I would have done without you, Kurenai, he said as he squeezed her slightly harder to emphasize his point before stepping back and showing her his furiously blushing face. He missed the slight pink on her cheeks from his sudden hug as he turned and headed towards the door. I should get back home. It is getting late. Thank you for the tea, Kurenai-sensei, he said as he put his shoes on and left the house, never noticing how Kurenai stared after him, an odd look in her eyes. Scene break. As Naruto walked home, his heart lighter and his mind clearer from his talk with Kurenai, he thought about the one thing he hadn't told Kurenai, a realization he wasn't quite comfortable sharing with her just yet. A thought that had passed through his mind without him consciously grasping it last night. He smiled up at the night ski, so much like the previous night and yet so different, as he thought of that conviction. To realize that no one your own age will ever be romantically involved with you for years to come, depressing, isn't it? He thought rhetorically to himself. He wondered when he had started to think so much about things such as girls and his future. Things such as what he was looking for in a woman and who he would consider a good mother of his children, Cammy willing. He was curious if anyone else his own age ever gave serious thought to such ideas but brushed it under the rug as another quirk he must have of himself. He had accepted that no one from his own generation of ninja would ever be involved with him beyond a friendship, at least from Konoha. Sakura had already proven that she couldn't handle a relationship and Naruto didn't even like her anymore. He could only barely tolerate her as a comrade since her recession back into slight fangirlism. Ino had already proven she was still caught up in Sasuke, at least from his point of view, and he knew there would only be bad blood between the two of them for a while. Hinata. She was a strange and odd girl, yet he could see her becoming a woman of great beauty one day, especially considering her figure from her bathing suit, something that had him blushing. But she wasn't what Naruto wanted in a woman. She lacked confidence, and she also seemed deathly afraid of him each time he approached, as if a single touch from him would have her bursting from her skin and shattering into pieces from his attention. Not to mention her clan, all of whom he had labeled as humongous sticks up their asses, equaling only the Sasuke revenge stick up his ass in his younger days, something which had him guessing they would try to stop any form of friendly attraction the two might try to foster. All in all, Naruto had sworn off love for now. The only women who could possibly have a relationship with him currently would be an older kunoichi, since civilians wouldn't work out well with his status and his occupation, or someone from another village, which was another can of worms that Naruto felt he couldn't deal with right now. Those were the only two options, and honestly he would favor a more mature kunoichi, someone who was capable of more thought than what the hell they looked like or who the hottest guy in the village was. Someone who would take him seriously and the direction he would attempt to go within a relationship. Best of all, anyone from Konoha would already know about the Kyuubi, and he wouldn't have to have a worry lingering over his head of his partner leaving him after he had come to have feelings for them because they detested the Kyuubi. But Naruto settled for, right now, growing stronger and allowing his life to continue with friends and his present precious people. He would deal with love when it came to it. That was how he had lived up until now. No reason to change it, for it had served him well. After all, without that, he wouldn't be training under Kurenai, he wouldn't have Shikamaru and Chuji as friends, and he wouldn't be Konoha's next Genjutsu master or future Hokage. Naruto sighed as he walked towards the bridge that he was to meet his teammates on. They hadn't changed much since their vacation almost 2 weeks ago. Sasuke still brooded about his losses, though it was slightly diminished as he seemed to be in slightly higher spirits because of the increase in training Kakashi had been giving them, even if most of the training was in teamwork. Sakura was more tolerable as she could now heal most minor injuries and a few major ones. Naruto was slightly surprised at the rate with which she increased her skill. She had been becoming more confident in herself since her decline in confidence when Naruto had stopped asking her out constantly. Something which led to her asking Sasuke out on a date maybe 4 times in the last 2 weeks. Naruto was proud of her increased skill and respected her work dedication, even if he thought she would never be a combat ninja once she found out the real dirty part of a ninja's occupation. Naruto looked up as the bridge came into sight. He was still an hour before Kakashi would appear, but he didn't actually hate the wait as much anymore. His control increased the longer he spent sitting there as he constantly used his self-made control exercise. He was capable of standing his team for now, but he still wished to have different teammates, ones that would actually support him, unlike what he felt in Team 7, even if that was currently more his fault than anyone else's. One odd thing about the past 2 weeks, though, was Naruto's imagination. At least, he thought it was his imagination, since what he thought he saw and felt couldn't possibly be true. To him, it seemed Kurenai lingered around him. As in, whenever they would train, she would insist on helping him stretch, running her hands down his arms, back, and legs to test his muscles. Now this wasn't anything new, as Kurenai had done it before. It just seemed like a different touch to him whenever she would seemingly take too long on one muscle or somehow send a shiver down his spine by pressing on certain places on his body that seemed more sensitive. Additionally, whenever they would spar, she would always press her body as close to himself as she possibly could. It was disconcerting and led him to create wild fantasies that often led to his defeat. He didn't know if she did this on purpose or if it was supposed to train/relax him, so he decided that it would be better for him to believe that it was his imagination running wild, since Kurenai wasn't interested in him like that and he wasn't interested in her. Right? He shook his head to clear it of the confusing thoughts that had been plaguing him. He walked onto the bridge, his face set into a blank mask as his eyes darted to his teammates before he stepped towards the opposite side of the bridge to begin his exercise. Sakura had stopped yelling at him for being late since the wave mission. "Hello, Naruto," Sakura said quietly, almost as if she wasn't sure she should greet him. Naruto paused in his walking as he turned his head to look back at her. "Hello, Sakura-san," he responded as he dipped his head in acknowledgement before continuing to walk towards his usual spot. Never noticing Sakura's smile, it wasn't what he usually called her, but she had welcomed him and he returned it. That was a step in the right direction. Naruto, unknown to his teammates, smirked as he walked towards his spot. He was happy Sakura had welcomed him. It felt good to be welcomed by his teammate. So, the next 30 minutes passed. Sakura wasn't staring at Sasuke and Naruto was focusing on his exercise when the leaves on his body suddenly blew away as Naruto's eyes snapped open and darted to a building across the bend in the river. His eyes remained locked at that same position as Sasuke and Sakura, surprised at the leaves' actions, cast glances at him and followed his gaze to the building, both of them tensing as they felt Naruto tense. Their teamwork showing to perfection as Naruto called out, "Come out!" The tension increased slightly. "Kakashi-sensei," he said as he smirked at his face-planting teammates, who then glared at him as he grinned cheekily. Kakashi appeared on the bridge, his normal eye-smile present as he smiled at Naruto. "It seems your sensor is coming along nicely, Naruto-kun," he praised, which caused Naruto to glance at his sensei before smiling lightly. Kakashi, unknown to the 3 genin, felt a weight on his heart lighten when he saw that. "Well, I don't have any training planned for today, but there is something that I wish to tell you," he said. causing the three genin to pay closer attention to him. He had known that this was the correct decision when he saw their teamwork to Naruto's detection of himself. I decided to nominate you three for the Chunin selection exams, Kakashi announced, to the surprise of the genin. Are you sure we are ready for that? Sakura asked as Sasuke looked excited for the first time since their C-rank mission. Naruto had a look of doubt, yet one of determination. He didn't doubt his own abilities, so much as his team's overall chances to pass it. Kakashi nodded. I wouldn't have nominated you if I didn't think that. You did great on the wave mission and I believe you can do well in these exams, he said as he smiled reassuredly. But don't forget that most do not pass their first exams and there is a big chance you will face some more people much stronger than you, like that Haku boy, Kakashi warned. Sakura gulped while Sasuke and Naruto simply looked at Kakashi with blank stares. He shrugged. If you wish to take the exam, please sign these papers and report to room 401 at the Ninja Academy by 4 p.m. tomorrow. The exam is purely individual choice, so decide if you wish to go or not and please present yourselves tomorrow. Kakashi said as he disappeared into smoke. Chunin selection exams, eh? Sasuke said as he looked at his paper and began to walk away. Sakura looked down at the paper, indecision racking her as she turned and walked towards her home, away from the bridge as well. Naruto smiled at the paper, his resolve to take it and to prove the usefulness of Genjutsu on a wider scale, driving him to fill the papers out once he got home. He sealed the papers in a scroll and began walking home, a blank face on as his eyes darted around, taking in the world. Naruto smirked slightly as he rounded a corner and felt three familiar chakra signatures, his mood brightening until his eye began to twitch at the lame excuse of a hiding spot his friends would use. Sarutobi Konohamaru. Naruto barked out as he stood in front of the box with two holes in the front for eyesight. That has to be the worst hiding idea I have ever seen. Get out here, he said as he stared down at the rock. Naruto waited only a moment before the box disappeared and an abundance of smoke came from the same spot, coughing soon following the smoke as he heard them begin to stumble about. I think we used too much smoke. A nasally voice which sounded like the person had a cold rang out. Naruto's eye twitch only got worse when his three friends jumped out from the smoke and attempted a better introduction by forming a triangle, with Konohamaru at point. I would expect nothing less from the man I consider my rival, Konohamaru shouted as he pointed at Naruto. Naruto looked down at the self-proclaimed Konohamaru shinobi corps and held back a smile at the goggles around each of the three's heads. Konohamaru was at the front of the group, his short, spiky brown hair and black eyes reminding Naruto of his relation to his Gigi. He wore a yellow shirt with the Konoha symbol in red. Some gray shorts adorned his legs with what looked to be patches around his knees. The most notable thing about him, though, and the thing which caused Naruto to meet him, was the extra long blue scarf that wrapped around Konohamaru's neck and trailed behind him by several feet, leading to him tripping on it occasionally. On his right, Udon stood, his mop-top brown hair hanging past his goggles as a string of snot hung from his nose as he pushed his glasses up on his nose. He wore a blue shirt with a gray collar and edges, white shorts and the normal blue shinobi sandals. Nothing was particularly noteworthy about him except the gleam of intelligence Naruto could see lurking behind his sickly look, something he grew familiar with as Shikamaru had much the same look. On Konohamaru's left stood the only female of the group, Moegi. Her hair was the most noticeable about her. Much like Sakura's bubblegum pink hair, her orange hair stood out well within the crowd. It was tied up in two very large pigtails with red elastic bands. She wears a maroon vest with a dark pink shirt and pants, her hands fisted in front of her chest, as if she anticipated meeting someone of great importance or her excitement. She also wore the blue sandals of shinobi. Naruto idly noted that her cheeks looked odd with the red oval markings on them. Goggles, Naruto finally said in question as he looked them over, curious why they would be wearing goggles like him. Even if he thought he knew why, he wanted to hear it from them. Konohamaru smiled brightly. We are following boss example, he said happily. Naruto smiled lightly at them. Really? He asked amusedly. Good job on the goggles then, he said. Konohamaru beamed as Udon looked up, a glint in his eyes, and Moegi looked at him with hope. Boss? She asked. Naruto turned to her. Do you have some free time? Naruto pondered her question for a moment, looking at the eagerness on their faces. If I play with them, it will take all day, he thought to himself as he wondered what to tell them. Well, I guess I have some extra time. I can make a clone later on when I need to meet Kurenai-sensei. He thought as he opened his mouth. Yes, he said as if resigned to his fate. Sweet, that means boss can play ninja with us. Konohamaru shouted as Naruto felt his smile slip slightly. A ninja playing ninja. He thought with a small bit of amusement as he nodded to them. Okay then, let's test your stealth, shall we? He said, catching the group's attention. He smiled lightly as he adopted a sensei's voice, much like Kurenai does with him. You all will be given a 3-minute head start to run away and hide yourselves before I attempt to find you. The last one I find will be the leader for your group until the next training session, so hide well, he said, causing them all to gain a glint in their eyes and set themselves to run away. Ready? He said. Go! He shouted as he watched them race off and around a corner. He chuckled as he turned to leave. He would send some clones out to find them but let them hide for a little while before he did so. They needed to work on their hiding skills, but his sensor almost made that pointless since he could sense even their low chakra levels when they came into his range. He froze in his spot as he heard a few sounds and his sensor alerted him to 2 presences he hadn't noticed yet. Oof! Came the sound from Konohamaru. That hurt! Came the condescending voice of someone Naruto didn't know. Then he heard something that had him turning back to the corner his group had just rounded and moving forward at a quickened pace. Something akin to a genin's level of speed with the now 50-pound weights around his legs. Hey, let me go! Konohamaru yelled. Naruto rounded the corner just as the same voice spoke. That hurt, you little piece of shit. The boy who now held Konohamaru said. Naruto took a moment to observe the situation. Moegi and Udon were standing a few feet closer to Naruto than to Konohamaru and the odd boy who held him by the scruff of his shirt. The street they were on had a tree next to it but was mainly surrounded by buildings and a fence. There was little in the way of cover and only looked like a connecting alley between 2 streets besides the obvious sunlight shining down on it. The boy holding Konohamaru was wearing an odd bodysuit, all black, with a red and yellow circle on the front of his chest. The suit fell around him, indicating that it didn't hug his body, something Naruto was thankful for as he didn't think he wanted to see a man's body so well defined. His hood covered his hair but stood up with 2 small pieces of cloth that looked like cat ears. His forehead protector was wrapped around his forehead, a symbol of an hourglass with a bar on top of it, the symbol of Tsunade engraved upon it. Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly. His face was covered in what looked like makeup. Purple triangles and points seemed to dominate parts of his face as his eyes squinted at Konohamaru. He noticed that the guy had a bundle wrapped on his back with what looked to be brown hair coming out at the top of the wrappings. Naruto also spotted a young woman standing behind him. Obviously, a small relation was held between the two as their facial structures and body structures seemed to follow the same pattern, something Naruto learned from watching a few of the clan's many children. He noticed her blonde hair, drawn up into 4 different pigtails around her head along with her dark teal eyes. Her dress was a light purple which started right under her shoulders and went down her chest, showcasing her slightly developed breasts down her stomach and around her hips to end right around her mid-thigh. A scarlet-colored sash covered her hips and tied her dress to her body. Pieces of fishnet dotted her body, going over her shoulders and covering what was missed by her low riding dress. She had 2 pieces of fishnet on her creamy white legs, one on her right calf and one on her left thigh. Finally, Naruto saw that her headband was tied around her neck. Unlike her, he assumed, brother or cousin. Just as Naruto appeared, the woman spoke. Don't Kankuro, we will just get yelled at later. The boy, Kankuro it seemed, scoffed. You might want to listen to your beautiful sister over there, Tsunade, Naruto said as he walked up behind Udon and Konohamaru, a smile on his face as his eyes squinted to give the appearance of an idiot. He missed the slight blush on the woman's face as Kankuro scowled. What are you gonna do about it, limp dick? Kankuro asked haughtily from his spot with a hold on Konohamaru. Naruto smirked and began to walk forward towards Kankuro. Nothing much, he said disarmingly. Kankuro twitched his fingers and Naruto's smirk widened, only the woman catching it as she moved to intercept whatever the odd blonde genin would do. Naruto felt the chakra from Kankuro attach itself onto his leg, and begin to pull, but Naruto simply dispelled it by sending a small burst of his own chakra at the string, disabling it as he overpowered the string and continued approaching the boy. TCH. Kankuro scowled when he realized that his string had been broken. Hiding his surprise, "You're an annoying brat," he said to Naruto. He turned back to Konohamaru. "Basically, I hate midgets," Kankuro said, missing the twitch in Naruto's eye. He had always been sensitive about his size since he was the shortest of his class. "Especially younger ones that are rude. Makes me want to kill them," he said as he squinted his eyes again and looked at the boy in his grasp. Naruto's eyes opened and locked onto Kankuro. The woman shivered at the look in his eyes as Kankuro mentally started sweating. Someone they had underestimated now looked at them with the eyes of a predator. The eyes that reminded them of someone else they knew. "That," Naruto stated, the atmosphere seemingly dropping a few degrees as he released a slight burst of Ki. "Would be unwise," he said. "I'm not involved," the woman said as she took a step back, completely forgetting how she had been ready to step in and help her relation. "After all, that boy is the grandson of the Sandaime," he said, causing the Chunin's eyes to widen. "Hurting him over such a silly thing as bumping into you would be rather dangerous, wouldn't it?" he asked rhetorically as he suddenly smiled at them, giving them the impression that what they had just witnessed was nothing more than a figment of their imagination. Kankuro seemed torn between what to do. His decision was made for him when a stone came from the tree next to the path and hit his hand, causing him to drop Konohamaru, who scrambled next to Naruto. Naruto smirked. "Hey team, about time you got here," he said. Sasuke scoffed. "As if you could possibly do anything without me, dope," he said as he looked at Kankuro and the woman. The woman had a slight blush as she looked at him while he looked down on them. "What are you doing here?" he asked the Suna shinobi. "Another guy who pisses me off," Kankuro muttered to himself as Sasuke stared down at them. "Hey punk, get down here. I hate show-offs like you the most," Kankuro said as he grabbed the package on his back. Naruto's attention turned to him before his sensor alerted him to a presence which had just joined them. His eyes widened and he looked down as he felt the pressure of the person's chakra press down on the area. Unknown to Naruto, he had become much more sensitive to chakra because of him summoning clones to take watch when he would train and when he would attempt his genjutsu on them. So, when this chakra presence appeared, he was unprepared for the unnormalness of it, the vileness of it, above all, the wrongness of it. How the chakra seemed to twist and warp within the person and even surrounding the person. It felt slightly familiar yet completely different. The chakra was an odd golden color that spoke of bloodlust, much like when he had felt that twinge of Kyuubi's chakra. But it was completely different in that the chakra didn't scream just bloodlust as Kyuubi's did, but also odd feelings and fluctuations that had Naruto's mind reeling from the sheer amount of randomness it held. It felt fatal, it felt disgusting, it felt insane. He was dimly aware of the woman speaking. "You're going to use Karasu?" she asked, but it seemed almost as if she was a whole world away. It was as if that vile chakra had his mind swimming in despair and floating in a sea of his own inadequacy as his heartbeat sounded within his head. Thursday thump. Thursday thump. It sounded, his eyes vibrating with each beat of his heart as his mind started to work again. The amount of something akin to fear powering his adrenaline as he started to find the source of the vile chakra. His eyes darting around until landing on the branch next to Sasuke. His eyes wide in fear for his tentative comrade. Naruto didn't know what he should do, but he knew he had to help his comrade away from the monster that was next to him in the tree. "Sasuke, move!" Naruto shouted. Sasuke, trained in various D-rank missions and in the Wave mission, to unconsciously follow any warnings Naruto may give, disappeared from his perch and reappeared next to Naruto, a kunai already drawn as he set himself on Naruto's side, his eyes following Naruto's own narrowed ones. If the Suna ninja that was now standing on the branch gave any indication to his surprise at being detected, they didn't see it as he spoke. "Kankuro, you are a disgrace to our village." The boy was about Naruto's height, with extremely pale skin and short spiky hair, much like Naruto's own, but it was a brick red color. His eyes were a light green in color with dark black rings surrounding his eyes, much like the markings of a tanuki. He was wearing a black bodysuit with sleeves like a t-shirt and an open neck cut. A white cloth was worn over his right shoulder and down to the left side of his hips. A wide leather system of belts were strapped across his left shoulder and right hip, attached to his back. By these same leather straps was a gourd. His forehead protector was worn along the band of leather across his chest. The most notable aspect of this person, though, was the symbol on his left forehead. Seemingly burned into his forehead was the kanji for love, Gaara. Kankuro stuttered. Naruto stared, wide-eyed at the kid as he attempted to allow his mind to process the amount of information that his bloodline was allowing him. This guy radiated chakra almost like he did, but he couldn't sense a single speck of the normal blue chakra. It was all a golden color. Sasuke's hands clenched as he glared at Gaara. How did the guy get so close to him? Losing control of yourself in a fight? Gaara stated in a cold, emotionless voice much like what Naruto used when he needed his shinobi mask. Pathetic, he said as he turned to Sasuke and Naruto, disappearing in a swirl of sand and reappearing in front of his teammates. I'm sorry for my team's behavior. The woman and Kankuro quickly apologized as well. Naruto and Sasuke never relaxed as they looked at the group of genin. We arrived early, but we are not here to play around, Kankuro, Gaara said. Kankuro opened his mouth, but Gaara shot him a glare. Shut up, I'll kill you, he said as he turned back to Sasuke and Naruto. We are here for the Chunin selection exams, he said as he showed their passes. Naruto and Sasuke nodded as the trio of genin took their passes back. Let's go, Gaara said as he turned to leave. What's your name? Sasuke demanded. Who? Me? The woman asked as she blushed prettily. Naruto hadn't taken his eyes off of Gaara. No, you with the gourd, Sasuke clarified. Gaara turned back and looked at Sasuke. Sabaku no Gaara, he answered. And yours? He questioned back. Uchiha Sasuke, Sasuke said with a smirk. Naruto was more than happy to keep his name hidden. Gaara turned and all three of the sand genin disappeared in a sand shunshin. Sasuke merely glanced back at Naruto. Things are getting interesting, aren't they, Naruto? He said to Naruto. Naruto only darted his eyes to his teammate before turning around. Yes, Sasuke, they are, Naruto said as he began to walk away. Sasuke smirked and leapt up onto the roofs to head to his house, the Konohamaru Corps having run to their houses once Gaara had left. Naruto's eyes darted to where three more shinobi sat, watching their encounter. More interesting than I think we want, Sasuke, he thought as he made his way to his training ground, shaken by the chakra he had felt. Scene break. Naruto had been at his training ground for hours now. He looked up at the sun and frowned before closing his eyes while spreading his sensor ability to its impressive 35-yard range from him as the center. He couldn't sense Kurenai anywhere near his training clearing, and she was already 2.5 hours late. He was worried about her. It was beginning to get dark, and he was going to have to stop soon anyways. He sighed. He really wanted to talk to Kurenai or Shikamaru about the exams. He had been a bit worried about that odd chakra he had felt. If that kid was one of the contestants, Naruto didn't know if he was ready to face people with such fearsome types of chakra. He had eventually told himself not to talk to Shikamaru since the guy would just tell him it was too troublesome to enter the exams anyway, in the end. So, he had put his hope in Kurenai's training today, but she hadn't shown up. Neither had she told him she wouldn't be coming today, nor would she simply just skip their training without a good reason. As a result, he was beginning to get worried that something might have happened to her. He knew he was only a genin and wouldn't last a second against any foes that might be able to harm Kurenai, but he doubted anything physical could have happened inside Konoha itself. So, he surmised that she must have had a mission or some important meeting come up about the Chunin exams to start the next day. As he looked back down at the two remaining clones he was to fight, he dispelled them with a mental command, scrunching his face up at how dirty he was. He walked to the heated waterfall that he had met Kurenai at and loosed his sensor out again to check for any wanderers. Not sensing anyone, he began to strip and stepped under the waterfall. When he had finished that, he quickly washed himself, allowing the warm water to rush over his body to relax his muscles. After he had finished washing, he stepped back out and unsealed a new pair of clothes and put the dirty clothes into his old seal and headed away from the training ground. As he walked towards the village, Naruto felt his worry return, almost tenfold, causing him to finally admit that he would go by her apartment, just close enough to sense her chakra, before heading back to his own house. Naruto took to the rooftops, some odd form of urgency catching within his body as he began to make his way quickly to Kurenai's apartment complex. He became a blur to all but experienced shinobi as he jumped over the houses and shops of Konoha, his sensor stretching out towards Kurenai's apartment before he could comprehend how he was doing that. He felt her chakra signature, as bright as ever, and he subconsciously smiled as he felt her chakra's refreshing feeling wash over him, his speed lessening slightly as the apartment complex came into sight down the street he had dropped down on. He continued closer almost subconsciously despite the fact he had only wanted to see if she was at her home. Then, as he stepped to the apartment complex's entrance, he felt it, a flux in her chakra that had feelings of hopelessness and despair filtering over to him. He almost dropped to the ground from the weight of the emotion. For some reason unknown to him, Kurenai was in great emotional pain. His eyes shot up to the floor on which her apartment was and he whispered, "Kurenai." As he became a blur, using the full speed awarded him with his weights on, dashing up the stairs and towards her apartment door, his eyes and face showing his concern as his breathing was slightly labored. He wanted to just bust the door down to get to Kurenai, but instead, he knocked on it, knowing Kurenai wouldn't appreciate him just barging in on her. His instincts also telling him that he would probably only cause her to ignore him if he did such a thing. He waited patiently, feeling Kurenai's feelings being beaten back slightly as his knock sounded. He was lost in his own little world as he concentrated solely on Kurenai's chakra with his bloodline, causing a form of tunnel vision as he saw every fluctuation as she moved her body to answer the door. He put on a smile, albeit forcibly, and looked up as he felt her chakra stabilize a bit when she finally opened the door. He immediately noticed her disheveled appearance. Her normally curly hair was in disarray, strands of it sticking out in every direction. Her face was lined with fresh tear marks, though you could only see it because of Naruto's angle from which he stood under her face, the light reflecting on the slight moisture still clinging to her cheek. Her red lipstick was mostly rubbed off as if she had been chewing on something for an inordinately long time. Her state of dress was the second most important fact to Naruto. Her normal dress of bandages was absent, the first time he had seen her in something other than that dress. Instead, she wore a bathrobe that was obviously hastily thrown on because of the fact that most of Kurenai's chest was exposed, showing her red bra. Her breasts were mostly covered, only being able to see the sides which peeked out from the V of the robe. Her legs were bare beneath the robe, leading Naruto to believe she had nothing but panties on underneath that robe. His blush was immediately stopped from rushing to his cheeks as he caught sight of her mesmerizing wine-red eyes. Those beautiful and entrancing eyes which had so captivated him when he first saw her seemed broken, almost as if someone had taken her solid rubies and chiseled them into tiny little pieces, leaving this bloodshot mimic of an eye behind. He gasped lightly as he saw her eyes and she blinked in surprise. "Naruto?" she asked, her voice slightly hoarse. Naruto merely looked up at her, stunned at her dress and, more importantly, her eyes. She seemed surprised he would be here. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Naruto's eyes locked with hers. "You missed our training today," he responded, though he was internally trying to figure out what was wrong. The concern on his face made her own turn apologetic. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize the time," she said as she smiled weakly. Naruto stared at her incredulously. She was a stickler for time. For her not to notice the time was unheard of, and she cursed herself as she realized that Naruto knew that better than almost anyone because of their training. An awkward silence fell between the two, Naruto staring at her eyes with a look that made her oddly self-conscious as she looked down at herself and pulled her robe closed. Moments stretched on into minutes until, finally, the silence was broken as Kurenai spoke. "Was that all you needed, Naruto?" she asked wearily, obviously wanting to be alone, to anyone who was paying attention. Unfortunately, Naruto wouldn't let her be alone with such grief as he had been. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly, her ears straining to catch the words. She almost immediately froze as his blue eyes seemed to bore into her soul, letting her know he was aware that she was hurting, though she still tried to deny it. "Nothing," she said, her voice sounding weak to even herself. Naruto's eyes shone with concern but also a sliver of hurt. Kurenai turned away from his eyes. "Okay then, Kurenai-sensei. I guess I will just see you later then." I hope you have a good night, he said as he went to turn away, knowing she didn't want him there and he couldn't force her to answer him. Despite the fact he desperately wanted to stay and help her, he didn't want to overstep their friendly relationship. He didn't see Kurenai bite her lip before speaking. Wait, Naruto, she said quietly. Naruto turned to her, confusion in his eyes, and she attempted to smile at him, but it was obviously fake. She seemed slightly conflicted as she spoke. Won't you please come in for some tea, Naruto? She said in the same weak voice from before, making Naruto worry even more as he watched her. His concern visible as he nodded and stepped into her house, she closing the door behind him. Naruto took his shoes off and walked back into the living room, seating himself on the sofa again as Kurenai walked into the kitchen without a word to him. He watched the kitchen with a wary eye. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know how to get her to tell him. He desperately wanted to be there for her since she had been there for him so many times before. He used his sensor as much as his eyes to keep watch over her movements in the kitchen until the unmistakable sound of breaking dishes came from the kitchen. He was out of his seat and by her side in moments, holding her shaking hand. He looked at her, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. Now, one thing about Naruto is that he was not one for social interaction. He was never known for one with tact or even to understand his actions completely. Even now, Naruto found himself questioning his actions or trying to figure out exactly why what he was doing was wrong or how he had messed up something so bad people berated him for it. He did, however, know how to deal with pain. He had experienced it acutely himself and knew how he would like to be comforted and how he had been comforted, specifically by Kurenai. So, he used his previous experience to attempt to help his only friend. Come on, he said gently, standing her up and leading her to the sofa, sitting next to her. He kept her hand in his own as he looked at her eyes again. Tell me what's wrong? He asked quietly, his voice showing his concern as he gently rubbed circles into the back of her hand. Her eyes remained away from him until he cupped her face with his other and forced her to look at him. Please, he pleaded as he looked at her. You have done so much for me. He trailed off. Allow me to help you this once. Please, Kurenai. He begged her. Kurenai merely looked at him, her broken rubies showing a body that seemed devoid of its soul as she warred within herself. He waited patiently, watching as her rubies began to blink rapidly after a few moments and tears gathered at the edges of her eyes. Her broken rubies suddenly burst with pain and suffering so intense Naruto almost drowned in them as he looked at her. She pitched forward, her head landing on his chest as she wrapped her arms around him and began to sob into his chest. Naruto, stunned at her reaction, froze for a few moments before his body seemingly moved according to someone else's will and slowly wrapped his arms around Kurenai's own shaking form, his head laying a kiss on the crown of her shaking head of hair as he pushed his nose into it. He allowed her to cry her despair out, him starting to whisper comforting words under his breath to her. Shoo. It's okay. Everything's going to be okay, he whispered, many of his comments going much like that, something just reassuring her as she allowed the sorrow she had built up inside her out, something that Naruto knew he would want someone to whisper to him if he were hurt again. As Naruto comforted Kurenai, he couldn't help but to notice her scent again. With her so close to him, he took a deep whiff of that flowery scent. He felt slightly guilty about enjoying being so close to her while she was in pain, but he also knew that he was providing comfort to her unlike what had happened with him. They stayed like that, Kurenai sobbing into his chest and Naruto patting her or kissing the crown of her hair occasionally as he continued trying to soothe her, for close to 3 hours, though neither was aware of the time, only that Kurenai was slowly starting to stop sobbing. As the last of her sobs shook her shoulders, Naruto looked down as she shifted and raised her head, her hands releasing Naruto's torso as she wiped her tears away. Are you okay? Naruto asked quietly, feeling his chest soaked with her tears. He watched her eyes as she looked at him. They didn't seem to be drowning in that sorrow any longer, though it was still there. Sort of, she croaked. Naruto frowned. What happened? He asked just as quietly. Kurenai's eyes shot to his. A haunted look appeared but was put behind her eyes again as she responded. A very close friend of mine was killed on a mission, she responded, her voice strained. She didn't meet his eyes. Naruto's eyes narrowed and he spoke in a soft voice. That doesn't explain you crying. You know that our life is full of death. He said, though it might be a bit rough for someone who just spent 3 hours crying, he wanted to know what could cause Kurenai, the pillar he had come to expect to almost always be strong, break down like that. Kurenai looked down. A quiet stretched between the two. Much like before, tension whirling in the air and Naruto shifted slightly before Kurenai finally spoke. It was to be his last mission until he retired. I just thought. She trailed off. Naruto winced. The guy must have been powerful or cunning to reach retirement age. It just occurred to me that if someone like him could be killed, is this life really so certain like I feel? She tried to voice the complicated feelings she was having. Naruto understood what she was trying to say. She just faced the fact that most shinobi didn't live till a ripe old age. It hit her harder right now, probably because of the lose so close to home. He didn't truly understand what she was talking about as some aspects of this life escaped him, but he attempted to soothe her. No, Naruto answered, but we have chosen this life and we will live it to the fullest. He said as he looked her in the eyes. Not many of us will live full lives, but we can only try our best and hope to see a brighter future. He said, the words spilling from his mouth before he could think of them. Kurenai nodded to him and Naruto smiled. Her rubies were not fully repaired, but he was sure they would be by tomorrow. She was strong-willed, and this breakdown would only make her stronger. Are you going to be okay? He asked quietly. Kurenai nodded slightly, favoring him with a small smile, though it was strained. Thank you, Naruto, she said quietly. Naruto smiled brightly at her. Anytime, anywhere, Kurenai. I will always be willing to help you. You only need to ask, he said happily. Kurenai seemed to brighten looking at his smile, a true expression of happiness on his face. Sometimes you don't even need to ask, he said with a smirk, trying to lighten the mood and causing Kurenai to blush slightly. Naruto caught sight of the time and he sighed. I should head home. I didn't realize that it was so late, he said as he stood, stretching his body, allowing his bones to set back into place with cracks. He smiled back at her and faltered as he looked at her. She looked like she didn't want him to go and Naruto was loath to leave her alone after such an episode. He knew after her talk with him, if he would have been in his house alone, he might have receded back into himself. I don't think you need to go home, Naruto, she said. She pointed towards a bedroom. I have a spare bedroom and it is quite late. Naruto looked at her and at the bedroom before looking back at her, his eyes showing his confusion and slight apprehension. Are you sure? He asked, feeling that there was some other reason she was offering the bedroom to him. She simply nodded before he smiled at her. Okay then, but I need to sleep for the exams tomorrow, he said as he smiled at her. She smiled, though it seemed more like a smirk as she looked at him. Good night, Naruto, she said as she stood and walked down the hallway to her room. Naruto watched her for a few moments, his eyes straying to her robe-covered ass as it swayed side to side with each step before he smacked himself mentally and made himself walk into the spare bedroom. He saw only a bed and a dresser within the room, the walls bare and lifeless. He sighed and began to undress himself, leaving only his boxers on as he climbed into the bed and began to try to sleep. In moments, he was asleep and dreaming. Scene break. Naruto opened his eyes as he sensed someone within the bedroom. He blinked his eyes open, looking towards the doorway curious about who it was, his eyes widening as he saw the silhouette of Kurenai. Kurenai? What's wrong? He asked sleepily. Kurenai's arms came up and gripped themselves as she shifted on her feet. I can't sleep, she said. Naruto rose an eyebrow. Okay, he said as he watched her. Do you need me for something? He asked as he sat up. Kurenai shifted again before saying, I don't know. Naruto rolled onto his back as it blocked the light from the living room. Well, I'm here if you need me. Just do what you need, he said in response as he started to drift back into sleep. Naruto was dimly aware of the bed shifting, the light having been turned off. He knew that Kurenai had just joined him in bed and his cheeks flushed with blood. The bed jostled slightly as Kurenai seemed to shift around on the other side of the bed for a few moments before she settled down in one spot. Naruto felt himself starting to drift even further into sleep. All of a sudden, Naruto felt a source of warmth wrap itself around the right side of his body. He felt as Kurenai wrapped his body in her own arms, her body contorting around his own so she could touch him as much as possible with her own skin. The fact that she was only wearing a pair of panties painfully obvious to Naruto even in his half-unconscious state. He felt her breasts press around his arm as her legs wrapped around his own. He blushed even heavier and attempted to fall asleep. But it was not to be. Kurenai wasn't comfortable enough, it seemed, for the position they held. She leaned away from him, grasping his right arm and draping it along her back so she could press her breasts against his naked chest, her head resting on his chest as she curled around the right side of his body and nuzzled his chest before sighing lightly, and her breathing evened out. Naruto blushed heavily but slowly drifted to sleep with a huge smile on his face and a large blush on his cheeks. Scene break. When Naruto woke the next morning, he quickly looked over to the side of the bed he had felt Kurenai occupy and frowned. The sheets weren't ruffled and there was no warmth where she should have been sleeping. He groaned as he realized what he thought was truth last night had actually been a dream and thought about yesterday. He smiled, glad to have helped his friend before looking at the time. It was close to noon and Naruto idly wondered how he had slept so late, but assumed he was just more tired than he realized as he got out of bed, dressed himself and walked into Kurenai's living room. He smiled once again as he walked into the kitchen to see Kurenai sipping on some tea and smiling at him as he walked into the room. He nodded to her as he looked at another cup of tea, set out for himself and a small bit of food that was sitting there. "Thanks for lunch, Kurenai," he said. Kurenai nodded her head to him as she continued sipping on her tea. Naruto ate in relative silence as the two enjoyed each other's company. There was little need for words, and the silence was comfortable as Naruto finished his lunch and proceeded to wash his plate. Once he had done so, he sat back down as he looked over at Kurenai, enjoying the red rubies shining back at almost full force. "Naruto, I think there is something that we should talk about for the Chunin exams," she said with a hint of seriousness in her voice. Naruto nodded. Kurenai thought for a moment before continuing. "Deception is a very good tool in a ninja's tactics, and it is especially effective for Genjutsu users. This you know," she says, causing Naruto to nod again. "In other words, I think you should act as you did during the academy to throw off your competition," she suggested. Naruto's eyes widened slightly before they closed in thought. He silently weighed the advantages and disadvantages of such an action, at least as much as he could comprehend, and nodded slightly as he grinned. "That's very devious," he finally said with a small smile. "I knew you'd like that," she said with her own grin. Naruto was happy to see that she had recovered slightly from her ordeal. Unfortunately, he looked at the time and wanted to get ready for the exams. He looked at Kurenai with a small frown. "I need to head home and get ready for the exams. Are you going to be okay?" he asks. Kurenai smiles slightly, obviously touched at his show of concern, and she stands, walking over to him and leading him to the door as she speaks. "I'll be fine, Naruto. Thanks for your help," she says warmly, casting a glance at him as he puts his shoes on. She opens her door and he steps outside, turning to face her. "Really, Naruto, I'll be fine," she repeats as he looks at her. Naruto stares at her for a longer moment, noticing she seemed slightly nervous about something. He finally nodded, figuring he could do nothing else. He was unprepared when she spoke again. "Really? Thank you, Naruto." "Kun," she said again as she leaned in, quickly pressing her ruby-red lips to his cheek, brushing his whisker marks and sending him into a slightly catatonic state as he stared at her when she giggles and closes the door. He stands at the door for another minute before his hand absent-mindedly moves to his cheek, wiping a bit of red lipstick from it as he remembers how soft and warm her lips felt against his skin. He blushes a deep red as he looks at the lipstick on his fingertips before turning and heading to his home, a blush and a confused smile on his face. Scene break. Naruto walked up to the gates of the academy. Seeing Sasuke and Sakura standing off to the side, he walked over to them. His face had a smile on it as he greeted them. "Ready?" he asked. Sasuke nodded, but Sakura looked indecisive before nodding. Both of the boys' eyes narrowed at Sakura's show of doubt. Sasuke and Naruto shared a look as Sasuke turned and his teammates fell into step behind him. Naruto on his right, Sakura on his left as they proceeded into the academy. Naruto took notice of all of the people in the academy. There sure are a lot of contestants, he thought to himself as his bloodline showed him that no one was of any worthy notice in chakra pools yet. None of them had anything above Sasuke's. In other words, even then, not many had that. Naruto looked up as his team crested the top of the stairs they had been climbing and noticed the group of people standing in front of the room 301. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the poor cover-up Genjutsu, plus the fact they were only on the second floor. Naruto heard the sound of one person getting knocked down at the front of the group, and the throng of people seemed to part, allowing him to see the person who had gotten hit. The boy was wearing a green jumpsuit that stood out almost as much as Naruto's old orange one, orange leg warmers, and his Konoha Hittite was wrapped around his waist as a belt with a red cloth. However, what had Naruto's eye twitching, and Sasuke's as well, was the shiny bowl haircut for his black hair the boy was sporting along with eyebrows the size of a centipede. His beady black eyes were completely overshadowed by his eyebrows. The two people who had attacked the green-clad boy were standing in front of the disguised room. Both had brown hair. The one on the left had his hanging down haphazardly around his face, framing his black eyes, and the shirt and collar which reached up to his chin. He wore a vest over his shirt with plain white pants and blue shinobi sandals. He also had a backpack on his back. The one on the right had spiky hair much like Naruto's, which framed his own black eyes and the bandages that were on his face. The handle of large swords stuck up from behind each of his shoulders. He also wore white pants and blue shinobi sandals. "Ha! You plan to take the Chunin exam like this?" The one with spiky hair said. "You should quit now." The straight-haired one said as the two looked down on the green-clad boy with a sneer. "Please, let us through." A girl with brown hair said as she began to walk forward. Her hair was styled with two Chinese buns on top of her head, her Hittite, marking her part of Konoha much like the green-clad ones, sitting underneath the fringe of her hair. She was wearing a Chinese-style pink shirt with no sleeves and dark green pants that tapered at the end. The spiky-haired one knocked her in the head and sent her careening to the floor with a crash. "Horrible," one of the onlookers whispered. The spiky-haired guy looked at the onlooker who had spoken with disbelief. "What did you say?" he asked dangerously. The straight-haired guy then spoke. "Listen, this is our kindness," he said as the crowd bristled. "The Chunin exams aren't easy. Even we have failed it 3 times." The guy said, motioning to him and his apparent comrade. "Those that take this exam and end up quitting as shinobi, those that die because of this exam, we have seen it all," he said somberly. The spiky-haired guy spoke then. "Chunins are the leaders and commanders on the field of battle. Failure of a mission, death of a comrade. That is the weight of the Chunin's position and something one must be capable of dealing with in order to obtain this rank," he said with passion. "Yet, kids like you think you can pass," he said derisively. "We are just thinning out those that would have failed anyways. What's wrong with that?" he asked rhetorically, their passionate speech making it so people shifted nervously, none wanting to move too much from fear of drawing attention to themselves. Naruto smirked as he saw Sasuke step forward. "Time for the show." "I agree." Sasuke's voice cut through the silence as he stared at the two. "But no matter what you think, I will pass this exam, so you will let me pass," he said as he looked at them, causing the crowd to begin muttering to themselves. "That Genjutsu will be removed. I'm going to the 3rd floor," he said, causing the mutterings to increase. "Ah, so you noticed," the straight-haired person said as the sign for the room suddenly warped and the real number, 201, revealed itself. "Not really," he admitted with a shrug of his shoulders, his eyes darting to Sakura. "Sakura did," he claimed, drawing attention to her. "Her analytical ability and Genjutsu know-how are the most advanced on our team," he said, giving Sakura a boost in courage as Naruto fought off a scoff from his teammate's statement. "Of course," Sakura said, her dull eyes now firing with light. "This is only the 2nd floor after all," she said. The spiky-haired one moved then, speaking as he brought his foot around to hit Sasuke. Not bad. But all you did was see through it," he said. Naruto didn't move, his eyes watching the encounter and the crowd when he noticed the green-clad boy suddenly move, his wound disappearing as he appeared between Sasuke and the odd boy's kick, holding both of them with his hands. Naruto's eyes narrowed very slightly. "Taijutsu specialist, need to stay away from him," he deduced. The boy let out a sigh as he released the 2 kicks. "Hey!" A boy's voice rang out. Naruto turned to this new guy. He was wearing a khaki shirt with dark brown shorts that matched his hair, which fell to the middle of his back. His Hittite was wrapped around his forehead with the Konoha symbol on it as well. His eyes were completely white, much like Hinata's leading Naruto to believe this guy was from the Hyuga clan. He did notice that the guy's voice was slightly cold. What happened to the plan? He questioned. You're the one who said we shouldn't draw attention to ourselves, he said. The green-clad boy suddenly blushed and looked towards Sakura, causing Naruto to suddenly have to keep his chuckles to himself as he watched the boy's teammate shake her head. Oh no, she said as the Hyuga guy broke out into a cold sweat. The green-clad boy started to walk towards Sakura, a small smile on his face as he greeted her. Hi, he said. My name is Rock Lee, so yours is Sakura, he said as he blushed. Naruto suddenly had a bad feeling about this, as the boy brought his hand up and stuck his thumb up in a okay position and smiled, his white teeth shining as he said, Let's go out together. I'll protect you till I die, he said boisterously. Sakura stared at him for a moment before she spoke. No, wait, you're lame, she deadpanned. Naruto shot a small glare at her. It wasn't necessary to be so mean, but she missed the glare, as Lee slumped in depression. Naruto's eyes shot over to Sasuke as the Hyuga boy spoke. Hey you, he said facing Sasuke. What's your name? He asked haughtily. Sasuke looked over at the boy and scoffed. If you want to learn someone's name, you should give your own first, he responded. The Hyuga boy frowned. You're a rookie, right? He asked. Not leaving any time to answer his question, he continued. How old are you? Sasuke scoffed again. I don't have to answer you, he said as he and the Hyuga turned from each other and began to walk away from each other. Sasuke had a smirk on his face as if he was extremely excited to be here. Naruto kept his goofy smile on his face as his squinted eyes took in all of the competition. Sakura looked at her teammates and quickly signaled them to move as she wanted to get away from Rock Lee. They both complied, walking down the hallway towards the stairs. Scene break. Sakura led the way with Naruto on her right and Sasuke on her left as they approached the doors to the room 301. Kakashi closed his book as they appeared and smiled at them. Well, looks like you can take the exams, he said, causing Naruto and Sasuke to glare at him. What do you mean? Sasuke asked. To be honest, this exam can only be taken by teams of 3, so if Sakura had not come, you and Naruto would not be able to participate, he said as he lazily answered the question. Then why did you lie to us? Sakura asked. Because if Naruto or Sasuke pressured you, you would enter it, even if your heart wasn't in it. But you came of your own free will, so go take the exam as my proud team, he said as he eye-smiled at them before poofing away. The team shared aloof before Sasuke stepped forward, the team taking the same formation they had when entering the academy, Sasuke in front with Naruto on his right and Sakura on his left as they all smiled while opening the doors to the room. The Chunin exams had begun.